My name is Margaret Louise Henderson. I was born in the summer of 1959 inches. A small brick house on Clover Hill Road in Greensboro, North Carolina, the same house where my mother taught me to bake cornbread and my father sat on the porch every Sunday reading the paper cover to cover. I have lived a quiet life, a good life. I believed. 31 years in the classroom, teaching 8th grade English at Jefferson Middle School. A husband named Robert who brought me wildflowers from the yard every Friday evening until the morning his heart gave out without warning on a Tuesday in March, 6 years ago. 2 grandchildren I adore, and 1 son. His name is Daniel. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened, because I think it matters. I did not raise Daniel to be the man he became. I raised him to be kind. I raised him to be honest. I sat with him at that kitchen table every night until his homework was done, and I drove him to every soccer practice and every science fair and every college visit, and when he got into medical school, I cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I went back in to hug him. I gave that boy everything I had. Everything Robert and I had. Together. And then everything I had alone after Robert was gone. Daniel is a surgeon now. Orthopedic. He has a practice in Charlotte with 3 other physicians and a waiting room that always has fresh flowers in it. I know because I have been there. He makes good money. Very good money. He told me once, not bragging, just mentioning it the way you mention the weather, that in a strong year he clears over $400,000. I did not know what to say to that. I am a retired schoolteacher living on a pension and Robert's life insurance and a modest amount of savings I have been careful with for 6 years. I do not need much. But I do not have much, either. Not by Daniel's standards. His wife's name is Courtney. She came into his life during his residency, and I tried, truly tried, to love her the way I loved my son. She is pretty in the way that requires effort, always put together, always aware of how she looks in a room. She grew up in Atlanta in a family with money, and she has never quite let anyone forget it. Not rudely, just in the small ways. The way she mentions the neighborhood they live in, the way she describes their vacations, the way she looked at my kitchen the first Christmas she came to visit, not saying anything but saying everything. I told myself it did not matter. What mattered was that Daniel was happy. The first time my son asked me for money, I did not think anything of it. It was about 2 years after Robert died. Daniel called on a Wednesday evening and said they had an unexpected expense, something with the roof of the house. He said, a repair that came up suddenly, and the timing was bad because they had just replaced both cars. He asked if I could help with $3,000 and he would pay me back within the month. I said, of course. I transferred the money that same night. He paid me back 6 weeks later, and I forgot about it entirely. The second time was different. Not because the amount was larger, though it was, but because of what he said when he asked. He called in the middle of the afternoon on a Friday, and his voice had a particular quality to it. A careful quality, like he had rehearsed what he was going to say. He told me that Courtney's parents were coming to visit, and they wanted to take everyone to dinner at a restaurant called Maison in uptown Charlotte, which I knew by reputation to be the kind of place where the menu does not list prices. He said he wanted to treat them, that it was important for him to be able to do that, and could I help with $2,000 just this once? I want to be honest with you. Something sat wrong with me when he said that. I could not name it exactly, but I felt it, the way you feel weather changing before you can see it. I said I would think about it and call him back. I called him back 2 hours later and said yes. That was the beginning. Over the next 18 months, I kept a record. Not because I am a suspicious person by nature, but because I am a school teacher, and teachers keep records. It is how we are wired. Every time Daniel called with a request, I wrote it down in a small green notebook. I kept in the drawer of my nightstand. The date, the amount, the reason he gave. September 14th. $1,500. Courtney's college roommate was getting married, and they needed help covering the hotel and the gift because it was a destination wedding in Savannah, and the timing was difficult. November 3rd. $2,200. Christmas gifts for Courtney's family because they exchanged expensive gifts, and Daniel did not want to seem like they were struggling. February 8th. $800. A birthday dinner for Courtney's mother at a restaurant where Daniel wanted to pick up the entire table. April 22nd. $3,500. This one, he said, was for a home repair again. Something with the HVAC system. I wrote it down and said nothing. July 6th. $1,200. Their babysitter had quit unexpectedly, and they needed to hire someone through an agency quickly, and the agency required a deposit. In 18 months, I had given my son just over $12,000. $12,000 from a woman living on a fixed income, sending money to a surgeon. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I sat with it for a long time. I did not say anything. I know how that sounds. People will wonder why I did not say anything. And I have asked myself that question many times since. The honest answer is that he was my son. He was the child I had rocked to sleep and walked to the school bus and cheered for at graduation. When he called me with that careful voice, I could still hear the little boy underneath it, and I could not make myself say no. I told myself he would find his footing. I told myself Courtney's expectations would settle down as they got older. I told myself it was a season and seasons change. What I did not tell myself, what I refused to look at directly, was the thing my neighbor Patricia had been saying to me for months. Patricia is 72 and has 4 children and grandchildren spread across 3 states, and she has seen things. She sat across from me at my kitchen table one afternoon in August with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and she looked at me with those clear brown eyes of hers, and she said, "Margaret, your son is not struggling. You are struggling so that he does not have to." I changed the subject. I am not proud of that. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday evening in October. Daniel called, and he sounded warm and easy, the way he sounds when he wants something but is not ready to ask for it yet. And we talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular, how the grandchildren were doing in school, whether I had seen the doctor about my knee. Then he told me that Courtney's parents were having their 40th wedding anniversary, and the family was planning a dinner to celebrate. A private room at a restaurant called The Lantern, which is, he explained, very difficult to get into. He said it would seat about 20 people, the whole family, and the dinner would cost somewhere in the range of $4,000, and he wanted to be the one to cover it as a gift to her parents. $4,000. I was quiet for a moment. I heard my own breathing. He said, "I know it's a lot, Mom." And I said, "Yes, Daniel, it is a lot." And he said, "I would not ask if it weren't important." And I said, "Let me think about it." And he said, "Of course, take your time, but they need to confirm the reservation by Friday." I sat in my living room after we hung up and I looked at the green notebook. I added up the numbers for the 3rd time, even though I already knew what they came to. $12,000 in 18 months. And now $4,000 more. $16,000. I thought about what Robert would say. Robert was a methodical man, a man who believed in saying the difficult thing plainly, and I could hear his voice as clearly as if he were sitting in his chair across from me. He would say, "Margaret, you know what this is." I called Daniel back the next morning and I said yes. I transferred the money that afternoon. 3 days later, on a Sunday, Daniel called again. His voice this time was different, apologetic. Almost, he said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I know you were looking forward to it, but the anniversary dinner has been moved." He said Courtney's father had a scheduling conflict, and they had to push it back by 3 weeks. But the restaurant could not hold the reservation that long, so they had decided to do something smaller at home instead, and he was going to refund the restaurant deposit and get my money back to me within the week. He said he was sorry for the confusion. I said, "That's all right, Daniel," but I wrote it down in the green notebook. That Sunday passed. Monday passed. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. My daughter-in-law posted photos on her social media. I know I am not supposed to be looking, but Patricia had shown me how to find the page, and I am only human photos of a new handbag, a new pair of boots, a long lunch with friends, somewhere that looked expensive. My son did not transfer any money back to me. On Friday evening, I was sitting with Patricia on my back porch when my phone showed me a notification. It was a photo my son's wife had tagged him in. The caption said, "Celebrating the Hendersons' 40 years of love and family," with a string of heart emojis. There were 12 people at a long table in what was clearly a private dining room. There were flowers on the table. There were bottles of wine. My son was smiling. Courtney was in a dress I had not seen before. The restaurant name was visible on the menu in the corner of one photograph. The Lantern. Patricia saw my face before I said a word. She put down her glass and she said, "Margaret, what is it?" I handed her the phone. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she set the phone down on the table between us, and she said, very quietly, "What are you going to do?" I sat there in the cooling October air, and I thought about $12,000, and then 4,000 more, and I thought about every phone call, with that careful, rehearsed voice, and I thought about Robert, who built things carefully, and did not believe in letting wrongs sit untended. And I thought about the green notebook in my nightstand drawer. I said, "I'm going to make one phone call. I want to tell you what that call was. But first I need to tell you something I had discovered 3 weeks earlier. Something I had not told anyone, not even Patricia. When Daniel had first asked me for the anniversary dinner money, something made me pause before I transferred it. Something made me do what I had never done before, which was to ask a question. I told him I wanted to make sure the money was going to the right place, and I asked him to send me the restaurant's name and the contact information for the event coordinator, so I could feel settled about it. He had hesitated, just briefly. Then he said, "Of course, Mom." And he texted me a name and a number. I called that number the next day. I said I was following up on a reservation for the Henderson anniversary dinner. The woman on the other end of the line was very pleasant. She looked up the name. She said there was no reservation under Henderson. She looked under Daniel's last name. Nothing. She looked under Courtney's parents' names. Nothing. There had never been a reservation. I hung up, and I sat very still in my kitchen for a long time. Then I opened the green notebook, and I wrote down what I had just learned, and I underlined it twice. So when I said I was going to make one phone call, this is what I meant. I had spent that week before the dinner quietly and carefully. I had gathered every bank statement going back 2 years. I had printed every Venmo and Zelle transfer notification I had. I had printed the social media photos. I had written, in my neat school teacher's hand, a clear and complete accounting of every dollar I had sent my son and the reason he had given me and the date, $16,450. I had also written, separately, the results of my call to the Lantern 3 weeks prior. The call I made that Friday evening from my back porch was to Daniel's phone. He answered on the second ring. He sounded relaxed. I could hear voices in the background, a little music, the soft sound of a dining room. I said, "Daniel, I can see from your wife's photographs that the dinner is happening tonight after all." He went quiet. I said, "I am glad everyone is having a nice time." I said, "I want you to know that I have been keeping records." I said his name once more, and I told him exactly how much money I had given him over the past 18 months. And I told him what I had found when I called the Lantern 3 weeks ago. I told him I had printed everything and organized it in a folder, and that I intended to share it with his father-in-law, whose email address I had found without much difficulty, unless Daniel called me back before midnight with a plan for how he was going to repay every dollar. I did not raise my voice. Robert always said that a calm voice carries further than a loud one. Then I said, "Enjoy your dinner, Daniel." And I hung up. He called back in 14 minutes. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message and his voice was not careful and rehearsed anymore. It was shaken. He said, "Mom, please, let's talk about this." He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said Courtney had been under a lot of pressure and he had been trying to keep things together and he knew he had made mistakes and please, Mom, please call him back before I did anything. He called 2 more times that night. I did not answer either call. What I did instead was sit with Patricia on that porch for another hour, and we talked about Robert, and we talked about her late husband Gerald, and we talked about what it means to love your children through the hard things, the things that break your heart a little, the things you did not see coming even when part of you did see them coming and chose not to look. Patricia held my hand for a while, and neither of us said anything, and the night was cool, and the stars were out, and I felt strangely lighter than I had in months. Daniel came to my house the next morning. He drove 3 hours from Charlotte, and he arrived at 9:30, and he knocked on my door, and when I opened it, he looked like he had not slept. He was still wearing what looked like the clothes from the night before. He stood on my porch, this tall man who had once been a small boy who was afraid of thunderstorms. And he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I opened the door and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had helped him with his homework 30 years ago, and he talked for a long time. He told me things he had not told me, things about money and pressure and a lifestyle he had let grow beyond what he could honestly sustain, about Courtney's expectations and his own pride, and the way each request to me had felt. In the moment. Like the last one, the one that would get them over some invisible line, until there was always another line. He told me he had not let himself look at what he was doing to me because looking at it would have required him to admit it was wrong. I listened to all of it. I did not say much. When he was finished, I got up and I put the green notebook on the table in front of him. I said, "Open it." He opened it. He read every page. When he got to the last page, where I had written the total, he put his face in his hands. I sat down across from him and I said, "Daniel, I love you. I have loved you your whole life, and I will love you until I die, but I am 65 years old, and I am living on your father's life insurance and a teacher's pension. I am not a bank. I am your mother. And what you have done is not how you treat your mother." He kept his face in his hands for a moment. Then he looked up and his eyes were red, and he said, "I know." He asked me what I needed from him. I told him. A repayment plan. In writing. Every dollar. Not because I needed to punish him, but because I needed to know that he understood what this money meant and where it had come from and what it had cost me. And I needed him to tell Courtney the truth about all of it, because I was not willing to pretend in front of her anymore. He agreed to everything. It has been 7 months since that Saturday morning at my kitchen table. Daniel has transferred money back to me every single month, on the first, without fail. He has not missed once. We have had some hard conversations, he and Courtney and I, conversations where things were said that were uncomfortable and necessary and overdue. Courtney has not become a different person. I do not expect her to, but she knows now that I see clearly, and there is something to be said for that. Patricia asked me not long ago whether I felt sad about it, about all of it, about what my son had done and what it had cost us. I thought about it honestly before I answered her. I said I feel clear. I said that is different from happy, but it is better than confused. I spent 18 months confused, telling myself a story that was easier than the truth. I told myself my son was struggling. I told myself he would find his footing. I told myself the next time would be the last time. None of that was true. What was true was written in that green notebook in my own handwriting, and when I finally stopped looking away from it, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Robert used to say that you cannot protect people from consequences without also protecting them from growth. I did not fully understand that when he said it. I understand it now. If you are watching this and you have a notebook of your own somewhere, a mental one, a list of dates and amounts and reasons that never quite added up, I want you to hear me when I say this. You already know. You have known for a while. The love you have for your child is real. The love is not the problem. But love without clarity is not kindness. It is just a longer road to the same hard conversation. I am 65 years old, and I am a retired school teacher. And I am the daughter of a woman who delivered me in a small house on Clover Hill Road. And I have learned, later than I should have, that my savings and my security and the peace of my remaining years are not less important than my son's comfort. They are not less important than anyone's comfort. My name is Margaret Louise Henderson, and I made one phone call and I sat on my back porch under the October stars, and I finally, for the first time in 18 months, felt like myself again.